I thought your book was fabulous. I really appreciated having the opportunity to read it. And so I'm very grateful to you to sit down and answer a few questions for me.
Looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Okay, so the first question I have for you is, what inspired you to write this novel?
I didn't conceive the novel and then start writing. I started writing and the novel came into being. Sort of, well, I guess I need to explain that. Several years before I started writing, I met a woman who was a dominatrix. A young woman, very curious about life and adventurous, and I think like a lot of young women today, just was not interested in sitting clerking in an office from 9 to 5 or working as a clerk in a store for paltry sums. And she read an ad somewhere for a dominatrix that promised training. And she said, what the hell? And just, why not? You know, quite courageous, I thought, but never having tried it before, not even knowing much about it. And she told me that she really loved it and was amazed at the number of fantasies there are in this world. I seem to remember her saying there seem to be as many fantasies as there are people. And she got pleasure out of it, and realized that some of her clients certainly did too, and was of the belief that if more people integrated their fantasies, whatever they may be, it may have nothing to do with domination, but fantasies period, into their life with their as a couple, that they would be much happier.
So this was based on, it was inspired by an actual event or events or an actual moment, not just something that you kind of...
No, that's right. I was always interested in fantasies, and I always wondered whether it would be foolhardy to try to make them real, whether that would destroy the fantasy. I mean, dreams and daydreams are like that. They're ephemeral. They just go up in smoke if you're not careful. So anyway, going ahead a number of years, it's always been my habit when I've had time, just for pleasure, to sit down and see where my fingers go. And because often it leads to nothing, but often it leads to surprises, and the day has gone by, and it's a wondrous thing. I love it. And I found over in the following years, twice, actually while writing for my own pleasure on a train, which is a wonderful place to write, between A and B, with no phones, no interruptions. And
which is a rarity, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I noticed that I had twice tried to write about her, try to put her into some kind of dramatic context. Just scenes, I had no idea of a book or a short story even, just for the duration of my train journey, seeing where they would go. And over time I added a bit here and there and took away. And I kept those files. There were sometimes different attempts at the same scene. And then when I finally got down to writing the book, it was late winter. I had been depressed, maybe by winter, who knows, a nameless thing. And I decided, like we all do once in a while, to do something that will make us more either productive or just put our lives to better use. And I gave myself a challenge of 21 days. I would start each morning, I would make my coffee and start writing. And if nothing came, I still had to sit at the keyboard until my coffee the whole coffee pot was empty. So that could be an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the first mornings, sometimes maybe 7 or 8 words, and then maybe 20, and so on. And bit by bit, I was suddenly up into the hundreds.
Wow.
But I had no idea where I was going. And then, after quite a number of days of this, when I was already excited by the process, because I think if you tell your unconscious that you're interested in something, like if you say you're interested in your dreams, you will recall your dreams better. The same thing with writing. If you let it go, words were coming more easily, and invented scenarios and so on. And all of a sudden, I realized that where I was on a given day, one of the little scenes I'd written about this dominatrix on a train might fit in. So I stuck it in, I copy and pasted it in, and said, let's see where that goes. And in a very, very short order, another scene that I had written sort of fit in. You know, I had to adjust it to fit with what I was writing before. And within a month, I can't remember exactly, but I started to believe I've got a book here. But I would have been hard pressed to describe it. But I just had a feeling that a story was starting to be told. And it's hard to describe how exciting that gets.
Absolutely.
Because it's not a bunch of tangents. And by the time I finished, in the following months, when I knew I had a novel, I was writing anywhere from 1,000 to 7,000 words in a day. Like I worked 14, 15 hours, and I was dreaming it and everything else. Wow. It became all consuming. It was the most exciting thing in my entire life.
So it started as an experience, and then it became a real adventure in your own mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've written other novels, some I have not completed. I think it's a total of 4. And starting when I was quite young, like in my 20s. And I ended up being totally dissatisfied. I did not like them. I don't even know whether they're around in any form anymore. Probably not. Papers stayed around. Not like today, but digital, everything stays around. But this was the first one that I knew I had a book. And I knew when I finished it, I knew it was good. I was excited as can be about it. And because I didn't set out to write a novel. I had and even when I started feeling for sure that I had a novel, I gave no thought whatsoever to publishing it. I wanted to tell a story.
What audience do you think would most enjoy this novel?
Well, the novel, it's hard to say in some ways, because the novel would be categorized as literary fiction, which is a category for books that don't fit into any other category. It's of interest in that an author has total freedom to structure the book in any way. Some literary fiction novels are entirely inside someone's head and have no plot, and others may indeed. With that, I think what counts is people who like literary fiction like reading, and everyone likes a compelling story. And while I can't identify any particular group of readers, I would think anyone who likes a good story, I feel it is a compelling story. Did I think of, because it has BDSM elements in it, did I think that would be, it's certainly not the target, because I wanted to reach a much wider audience. It's not a BDSM genre novel in any way, shape, or form. But I would think it would be certainly of interest to anyone who had any curiosity or interest in BDSM. In the whole idea of submission, of domination, whatever. But it's also of interest, I realize, to, I think anyone once they start getting older, start realizing that they are aging, you start wondering about sexuality and how that will play out in the coming years. And I've always been struck by how when we're young we think we have lifetime friendships with people. You know, it starts in school or university, whatever. And as you get older you realize that they have an expiration date quite often. Either people move away, or they die, or they just end up in relationships where there's no room for the old friendship to have. And I think a lot of people as they get older you don't make new friends the way you do when you're younger. And I think a large part of the population, as they get older, get quite lonely. Very, in fact. I think there are probably an awful lot of people in wherever you live who are living very solitary lives. And so that's a big factor in the book. So that would appeal to them. But I also think it appeals to younger people in that they're much more open than I was at that age about sexuality. I think they have a much broader definition of sexuality than I ever did. And they're clearly willing to try things. And through the dominatrix, she's a good example of that. Just how she backed into it, but was open to it. In fact, became very excited by an exploration of people's nature. I think it appeals to a fairly wide range.
Next question is, were you worried that the subject you explore in the book may be controversial?
No, because I don't think things have changed so much with the advent of the internet. And then publication of books like 50 Shades of Grey and so on, which sold millions and millions. It's no longer, nothing in there is a subject that is only spoken of in whispers anymore. It was not all that long ago, but it's not now. So once again, I felt it would be of interest because of recent changes in people's interests. But again, go back to, if it's a good story, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. You could be writing about a horrible person, but if you did it in a way that the story was interesting, that you felt you were learning how human minds work and hearts work, you would still read it. You know? And that's a lovely thing about fiction. So again, it was, if the story's good, don't worry about what the content is.
Is this your first published novel?
It's my first published novel.
Okay,
it's the first one I tried to publish. The other ones I ended up hating. So,
so in that case, are you working on anything new?
Is this
the first, or is this the only?
I hope it's not the only, although I might want to write short stories instead. I really don't know. It depends on the idea. About 15-20 years ago, I was researching a novel, an historical novel, and I've, since completing He and She, I've contemplated going back to that, but I'm just not sure. I wouldn't want to approach it in the same way I did when I researched it to death, and it lost the spark for me. And this was an eye-opener, He and She, as a means of writing without research. So I'm telling myself, it's been 15 years since I did all that research. Some of it must still be in my head. I did an immense amount of reading. And maybe I should just start someday writing for my own pleasure, and but in the setting that I envisaged for that novel, to see what happens.
Interesting. So it might be a completely different subject matter altogether, but we may see more from you. Well, that sounds promising. Is there anything else you'd like to sort of add about yourself or about your novel? Maybe some information where we can find it, how we can...
Well, it's available online everywhere in all digital formats and in paperback. All the usual places. What I would like to add is I really have found, I'm glad I self-published. I started looking for a traditional publisher, and I spent about 8 months looking for agents and going directly to publishers, and found it a very frustrating prospect. I just wanted to get the book out, and so I decided to self-publish. I knew nothing about it when I started, and I do recommend it because more and more traditional publishers are doing next to nothing for authors, no promotion, no nothing, and most of them only sell a few hundred copies, and bookstores return them, and that's it. They're left to do their own promotion. And on top of it, the publishers take almost all the money, and you've got to pay your agent and everything else.
So you would promote self-publishing then?
Absolutely, absolutely. Fantastic. But the other side of the coin is that unlike a book like this, say 7 or 8 years ago, would be competing maybe with several 100,000 other books. Now it's competing with millions.
Yeah.
Because self-publishing is so easy. It really doesn't cost anything. And
So
you
how
have
would you
to,
go about sort of filtering your book to make it?
that's the hardest part. Your book, I envisioned, I remember seeing a photo about the environment and of millions of cell phones in a dump. Well, your book ends up at the bottom of that pile. And I think from what I've read, the only thing you can do, and it's what I try to practice, is try to get readers one by one. Like you join groups like Goodreads is an immense, 20 million members, a book site, and there are others like it. And you join, and you can list your book there, but you can also talk about books you read with other members, and search for other people perhaps willing to review your book, and you might review theirs, that sort of thing.
Well, that's great. Those great tips for other people who are looking
Yeah,
at publishing.